a high school athlete, a construction worker, a grandmother with chronic back pain. They all had something in common. A doctor prescribed them a painkiller, a pill their doctor promised was safe, a pill that promised relief but instead delivered a national nightmare. Every day, an average of 217 Americans die from an opioid overdose. That's one life lost roughly every 7 minutes. This isn't a story about some distant problem. It's happening to our neighbors, our families, and in our communities. It's the story of how a single prescription lit a firestorm that has evolved through 3 devastating waves, creating one of the worst public health crises in American history. This is America's darkest addiction. It all began quietly in doctors' offices and pharmacies. In the late 1990s, the way we thought about pain began to change. For years, doctors were cautious about prescribing strong opioids for chronic pain because they feared their addictive potential. But a new wave of pharmaceutical marketing was determined to change their minds. At the very center of it was a company called Purdue Pharma and its blockbuster drug, OxyContin. The company launched one of the most aggressive marketing campaigns in pharmaceutical history. They flew doctors to all expenses-paid seminars, handed out slick marketing materials, and built a massive sales team. Their central message was a catastrophic lie, that the risk of getting addicted to OxyContin was less than 1%. Here's the thing. Internal documents later revealed the company knew this wasn't true. They targeted doctors who prescribed the most and pushed for higher and higher doses, all to drive up profits. As OxyContin sales soared into the billions, so did addiction rates. From 1999 to 2010, the country was flooded with prescription opioids. People who started with a legitimate injury, a bad back, a sports accident, a major surgery, found themselves trapped. The pills were everywhere, in medicine cabinets in every suburb and rural town. As more people became dependent, a dark secondary market exploded. People started driving to states with lax laws to get multiple prescriptions, funneling even more pills back into their communities. By 2010, this first wave had crested. The death toll from prescription opioid overdoses was approaching 17,000 a year, and the stage was set for the next, even deadlier, wave. As the body count from prescription opioids climbed, federal and state agencies finally started to crack down. New laws made it harder for doctors to prescribe the pills, and monitoring programs were put in place. Purdue Pharma even reformulated OxyContin to make it harder to crush and abuse. But what happens when millions of people are physically dependent on a drug and you suddenly take it away? For them, these measures didn't solve their addiction, they just cut off their supply. Desperate and facing the horror of withdrawal, they turned to the streets for an alternative that was cheaper and easier to get: heroin. This marked the start of the second wave in 2010. The switch was tragically logical. Heroin is an opioid, just like OxyContin. It offers the same high and holds off the same agonizing withdrawal. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, an estimated 80% of people who used heroin had first misused prescription opioids. Suddenly, the face of the epidemic changed. It wasn't hidden in pharmacies anymore. It spilled into the open. Communities that had never seen heroin were now ravaged by it. The crisis bled from rural and suburban towns into the hearts of cities. Overdose deaths involving heroin skyrocketed as a generation that started on a pill from their doctor found themselves buying from a dealer in an alley. The problem wasn't getting better, it was just changing form, becoming more dangerous and visible than ever. Section 3. The third wave, the Age of Fentanyl. Just as America was starting to wrap its head around the heroin crisis, something far more sinister hit the drug supply. Around 2013, the third and deadliest wave of the opioid epidemic began: the Age of Fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, first made to manage severe pain in cancer patients. It is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. A lethal dose can be as small as a few grains of salt. Made in illicit labs, traffickers started mixing this cheap, powerful powder into heroin to boost its effects and their profits. The result? An immediate catastrophic surge in overdose deaths. People who thought they were using heroin were unknowingly taking a drug with an unpredictable and often fatal potency. Soon, fentanyl wasn't just an additive, it became the product. Dealers started pressing it into fake pills, making them look exactly like real prescription drugs like Xanax or even OxyContin. Someone could buy a pill off the street thinking it was a standard medication, only to swallow a lethal dose of fentanyl. This wave has been the most devastating by far. In 2023, estimates show that illicitly manufactured fentanyl was involved in about 72,776 overdose deaths. The drug has saturated the illegal market, turning every use into a game of Russian roulette. The crisis that started on a doctor's prescription pad had morphed into a full-blown poisoning, driven by a substance so powerful it can kill in an instant. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around the human toll of this epidemic. Since 1999, more than 800,000 Americans have died from a drug overdose, with opioids as the main driver. In 2023 alone, nearly 80,000 deaths involved opioids. That's more American lives than were lost in the Vietnam and Iraq wars combined. And the devastation goes far beyond the numbers. The economic cost is just as staggering, costing the U.S. economy an estimated $1.5 trillion in 2020 alone. This includes hundreds of billions in healthcare costs for treating overdoses and addiction, billions more for the criminal justice system, and immeasurable losses in productivity. The social fabric of entire communities has been torn apart. The crisis has fueled a surge in the child welfare system, with thousands of children removed from homes where parents are battling addiction. Families are shattered by the cycle of jail, treatment, and relapse. And the burden on our first responders and hospitals is immense. Emergency rooms are overwhelmed. Police, firefighters, and paramedics are on the front lines, responding to overdose calls day after day, a relentless and traumatic battle. This isn't just a health crisis. It's an economic and social catastrophe that has touched every corner of the nation. So, is there any hope? In the face of all this devastation, it's easy to feel like there isn't. But across the country, a quiet but determined battle is being fought to turn the tide. One of the most powerful tools we have is Naloxone, a life-saving medication that can reverse an opioid overdose in minutes. Harm reduction groups and first responders have worked tirelessly to get it into the hands of anyone who might need it. At the same time, there's a growing understanding that addiction is a disease, not a moral failing. We know that evidence-based treatments are the real key. Medications like buprenorphine and methadone are proven to reduce cravings and cut the risk of death for people with opioid use disorder. Making these treatments easier to get is a top priority. And there are signs these efforts are starting to work. Provisional data for 2023 showed the first annual drop in opioid overdose deaths since 2018, with deaths involving heroin and prescription opioids falling significantly. It's fragile, but it's proof that prevention, treatment, and harm reduction can save lives. This progress is fragile, and the fight is far from over. One of the most powerful things any of us can do is raise awareness. When you share this story, you help fight the stigma that stops so many people from getting help. If you or someone you know is struggling, there are resources that can help. Organizations like SAMHSA's National Helpline offer free, confidential information and treatment referrals. Supporting local harm reduction and recovery groups in your own community can also make a real difference. The opioid epidemic is a uniquely American tragedy, born from a perfect storm of corporate greed, systemic failures, and a deep misunderstanding of addiction. It's a crisis that has shape-shifted over 2 decades, moving from the pharmacy to the street corner and leaving shattered lives in its wake. But this isn't only a story of loss. It's also a story of resilience, of first responders who refuse to give up, of families who fight for their loved ones, and of people in recovery who prove every single day that a different future is possible. The road ahead is long, but the recent decline in deaths shows that our collective actions matter. This national emergency began one prescription at a time, and it will be solved one life at a time through compassion, science, and a fierce commitment to healing the wounds this crisis has inflicted on our country.